Hi, friends. Pastor Terry here. We are Okotoks Alliance Church, and this is the 10-Minute Coach. We're going to go into the first part of the Gospel of John, chapter 8, today. Colleen Jansen preached from it on Sunday, and where we've been kind of loping through the Gospel of John. We slow down a little bit here because this is this intact story that really warrants spending more time in it. And Colleen did a great job of helping us kind of get into some of the emotion of this, some of the audacity, the offense of this, the extraordinary shaming of this woman as she's dragged into the temple courts, apparently from the act of adultery. The scandal to us, where's the guy? It all smacks of a setup. That the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders, are trying to trap Jesus. I think that's for certain part of what's going on here. Is he going to deny what the law of Moses says, or is he going to deny this woman? Is he going to abandon Moses? Is he going to abandon this woman? And Jesus turns the tables on these so-called shepherds. We're going to get to that shepherding language eventually. And part of the point will be they have failed in this role of being faithful shepherds. And Jesus is going to model for us what it means to bring both grace and truth together. Now, as you're reflecting on this, maybe leading your family through a quiet discussion around the dinner table or your life group, a couple of things that I think are maybe important to note. Depending on what translation you're reading from, there may be some kind of disclaimer that says the earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53 through 8:11. A few manuscripts include these verses wholly in part after John 7:36, John 21:25, Luke 21:38, or Luke 24:53. Now that's not confusing, is it? What's going on there? Now, if you're reading from the King James or the New King James, there's no note there at all, because the King James and the New King James are translated to the English from the original Greek based on the Textus Receptus. That is a collection of Greek manuscripts that were put together based on what's called the majority text principle. Whatever the majority of the texts say. So if you had 1,000 copies of the Gospel of John, which they've got tens of thousands of them. Like it's kind of ridiculous how many copies there are of these ancient manuscripts. But sometimes there's variation. These have all been hand copied, and so sometimes there's a variation from one to the next to the next. And so there's this question: well, why, and what's going on with that? And the majority text principle would be say we're going to go with whatever the majority of these say, and trust that that's the right one. More recently, scholars have been saying, wouldn't it make sense to prefer the oldest of these Greek manuscripts and prefer the reading that is there rather than the majority? And one of the realities that you end up with a family tree of texts. Some of those family trees were cut short because of fire, military conquest, and they were destroyed, and so you've got a few old copies, some dating back to the 2nd century, but there's not many of those, right? Anyway, so scholars have started looking at that more critically to say, okay, what really is the most likely reliable thing here? And so the Textus Receptus, the majority text, it has this passage right where we've got it. I think that's where it's supposed to be honest. But some of these older manuscripts don't have it, and so the NIV, the NLT, the ESV, modern translations have all made a note to say, hey, just so you know, this is what's going on here. Unfortunately, it does inspire, I think, some doubt for some people who are like, boy, I really loved that story. I thought it was really super meaningful. Is it not supposed to be in my Bible? Almost without exception, biblical scholars, New Testament biblical scholars, agree that it's supposed to go someplace. They might say, I'm not sure where it's supposed to go. I have one friend who's a scholar who's convinced that the reason it's missing from some of the early manuscripts were their scruples around this question. it didn't fit quite so comfortably with a narrative that wanted to prefer, and we're talking through the Middle Ages now, that wanted to prefer um, law over grace. Do the right thing. People are going to get kind of willy-nilly if they think Jesus is all super, gracious and kind and loving. Don't want that. I'm not sure if I'm convinced of that argument. Anyway, that's just a little explanation as to why that note is there, when you run into that note. And I've done a lot of reading on this, and I'm utterly convinced that this is where it's supposed to be. I can't fully explain why the manuscript record is what it is. I'm happy to go by faith on this, in part because it fits really well in the story. It's particularly interesting. It's easy to lose sense that back in chapter 7, the beginning of chapter 7, we begin the Feast of Tabernacles section. It's the fourth feast that's referenced by the Gospel of John. Well, we get into chapter 8, we're still in the Feast of Tabernacles. This is the one where they brought the water up and they poured it out on the rock, and it went down into the earth, or out in the corner of the altar and down into the earth. This is the one where the 475-foot high candelabras, so to speak, with the huge wicks from the priests' old robes, lit the city for 7 days, 8 days with an additional day. We're just not real clear on how the end of the 7th day and what took place on the 8th day actually fits together. There's probably somebody that knows better than I do. I've read a lot on it, and I'm still a little confused as to what happened on day 7 versus what happened on day 8. But the court, out of the court of the women, which is kind of interesting, these lights lit up the city for this festival, and so we're still in that, and it's in the middle of a bunch of darkness versus light. Living water, the conversation in chapter 7, Jesus said, "Come to me, and living water will flow from your innermost being." We're just after chapter 8, verse 11, verse 12, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So Jesus has been using these metaphors to help us see who he is. We've begun into the I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. We're going to get there. I am the door. I am the shepherd. These extraordinary statements that identify Jesus with Yahweh. We've already been looking at how he's been identifying himself through the Exodus, doing the things, the God things, the Yahweh things, that are identifying him with Yahweh. We're supposed to be paying attention to these cues. And now this woman is brought, and the letter of the law is thrown at her, and Jesus is bringing both grace and truth. The difficulty, and I think calling God at this, the difficulty is we tend to, because of our traditions, because of the way we brought up, because we tend to be wanting the right thing. I grew up that way, at least. Want the right thing, got to do the right thing. We jump down to go and leave your life of sin, or go and sin no more, depending on the translation you've got. That's the end of verse 11 of chapter 8. And we skip over a whole bunch of grace. Jesus brings grace and truth. Grace alone will not save us. Truth alone will convict us. Grace and truth together will save us. And this is what Jesus brings for us. And it comes beautifully together in this story. And we long for that to be our experience. We have been seeing examples of this, where Jesus is reaching into the lives of the marginalized, and through the Samaritan woman at the well, through the crippled man who is saved at the pool of Bethsaida. Well, we don't know if he's saved. He is healed at the pool of Bethsaida. We're going to see it again. We're going to come to another blind man who's blind from birth. We're going to look at that next Sunday. And these people who are marginalized, who it had been popularly said, well, somebody sinned. This is their illness, their sickness is obviously the result of somebody's sin, and therefore, sucks to be you. Jesus has nothing of that. He comes with grace. And when there is sin, he tells them to leave that and or avoid that. And he invites them to follow him. And we'll see that in that next account. So stay in chapter 8. I'll invite you to reflect on what it means for light to be in your life. I've given you questions on the back. Most of these are from Colleen herself, as we kind of think through, the concept of judgment and how horrible it is to be judged, and then what does it mean for grace and truth to be present as we cultivate this relationship with Jesus that's not built on shame, it's not built on condemnation, but it's built on this loving relationship where he invites us to walk with him and become better versions of ourselves because we're in relationship with him, and his life and his light is flowing through us and changing us into to looking more like him. I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Okotoks Alliance Church. This has been the 10-Minute Coach, 11 minutes now. Bless you and bye for now.